So we're going to move on to section 2 of the course now, and in this section of the course we're focusing on part 1 of the speaking test, often called the interview stage. And this lecture, lecture 5, is going to be all about how you get started in your answers in part 1, the importance of getting off to a good start. So let's talk about that just to begin with, the importance of making a strong start in your answers to the questions that you are posed. Let's have a look at 2 answers to begin with. These are 2 answers to the same question, and I want you to think about which answer is stronger. So let's have a look at the question. Very simple. Do you enjoy your job, and why or why not? So answer 1. Well, that's a difficult question. I mean, it depends on a lot of things. I like meeting lots of different people. And answer 2. Yes, I do. I enjoy it a lot. I love my work because it gives me a chance to meet people from a huge range of different cultures. So which one do you think is stronger? Hopefully, you picked answer 2. But why is answer 2 stronger? Let's think about that. If we look at it on its own, answer 2 here, yes, I do. I enjoy it a lot. What we can see is that the answer is a lot more confident to start with. It doesn't trip over itself. It's in command of its own language. And this is possible because it isn't afraid to use the language in the question. Now, this is a very important point. Some tutors, some teachers may tell you that you should try to avoid using the language from the question as much as possible. This is wrong. It's not natural to avoid language in the question. If your friend or an acquaintance were asking you a question, it would be natural for you to use some of the same language, and that is exactly what we want to put across in part 1. Part 1 should be sort of like speaking to a friend or someone you are close to. And as a result, we should try to be as natural as possible. So the words do and enjoy are in the question. So we'll use the words do and enjoy very naturally in the answer. That will give you a strong start. And as a result, that accurate opening will give you the confidence to think of an extra idea to add on the end. So use the language and grammar in the question to help you make a strong start. Do not worry about repetition, at least when you are opening your response. Just make sure to answer the question directly and then develop it with 1 or 2 points. So we're going to look into this technique in a bit more detail in this lecture now. So some example questions here. Do you like to travel? How long have you lived in your home? Who did the cooking in your family when you were a child? How popular are bicycles in your town? What are you studying at the moment? Do you like to spend your free time alone or with other people? These are very typical questions for part 1. Now let's look at some bad starts to begin with to understand what we do not want to do when we open our responses. Do you like to travel? The overcomplicated answer. This is one I hear quite a lot. The question of whether I am a fan of travelling or prefer staying homebound is not a simple one to which I can respond. Journeying to exotic nations, da-da-da-da-da-da. So this is unlikely to come out of the mouth of a candidate, but something like this is something I often hear as a teacher. People just trying to do far too much with the language to show off their range of vocabulary. And while this can sometimes be effective in part 3, it is totally out of context and out of place in part 1. So you do not need this overcomplicated vocabulary. Let's look at the second question. How long have you lived in your home? Now, the get to the point answer. Well, that's a very good question. So, actually, I guess it would be around about, more or less, get to the point. Okay, so some teachers again will recommend this as an actual technique, and it's awful. It's so transparent. If you begin your answer this way, it's very evident to the examiner that you are stalling for time. Language that's a little bit similar to this can be used in part 3, but do try to avoid it in part 1. If you need to say something, expressions like well are fine, but try not to do any more than that. Question 3. Who did the cooking in your family when you were a child? This is the overly brief answer. My mother, or my mother cooked. End. This is not enough. You're not demonstrating any of your vocabulary or grammar or fluency or pronunciation when you give an answer like this. Remember, this exam is a chance for the examiner to see what your speaking is like. It's very difficult for them to judge you based on an answer like that. Question 4. How popular are bicycles in your town? Now, the irrelevant answer. Well, the most popular form of transport is cars. There are cars everywhere in my city. They cause so much traffic. It's fine with the vocabulary, with the grammar, with the pronunciation, but it's very much not answering the question, and that could have an impact on your score. Question 5. What are you studying at the moment? Now, this is the repetitive answer. English is the subject I am studying at the moment, so I am studying English at the present time. This is actually quite a common response, and I'm not sure whether candidates realise they are doing it. But it's essentially a case of you don't know what to say, and so you repeat the same thing in slightly different vocabulary. Try to notice when you're doing this, try to stop it, and think about how you can develop your idea, which we'll be looking at a little bit later in this lecture. Final question. Do you like to spend your free time alone or with other people? Now, this is the, in inverted commas, the exam voice answer. It is my firm belief that spending free time alone is most pleasurable. This is a consequence of yada yada yada. Now, this is quite similar to the overcomplicated, except the language here really comes a little bit more naturally to people, but when they are in an exam. So when I'm in lessons with students, what often happens is that at the beginning of the lesson, I have a little chat with them. And when they're talking to me, super natural, it's fine, it's really good. As soon as we come into like a question answer format in IELTS, they suddenly change their vocabulary to try to make it a little bit more advanced. Do not do this. Just be natural. If you struggle with natural vocabulary, then try to immerse yourself in more English by watching movies and listening to podcasts and listening to conversations on YouTube and things like that. But just try to avoid creating this artificial, overly flowery language when you give your answers in part 1. Now, having looked at some bad starts, let's have a look at some good starts and some good answers overall. The first thing I want you to do is to look at these questions and try to pick out the language that you would use in your response, like we looked at earlier with the example answer, the good example answer. Now, which of these words do you think is going to be natural to use at the beginning of your responses? Hopefully, you picked out words like these. Now, let's see how they can be used in our responses. Do you like to travel? I do, yes. I love traveling because I'm really curious about the world, and I think going out and seeing new places is the only way for me to satisfy this curiosity. You don't have to use all of the language. Notice we changed like to love, but don't hesitate too much to use this language. How long have you lived in your home? I've lived in my current home for about the last 3 years. I moved to this place from London, the capital, when I was in my late 20s because I was getting tired of city life. Again, we're using quite similar language. Who did the cooking in your family when you were a child? My mum did the cooking when I was a child. I've never really thought about why, but I guess at the time it was just traditional gender roles for mums to cook and dads to work, rather than the other way around. How popular are bicycles in your town? Bicycles are fairly popular where I live, but cars are still more common by far. I think bikes are gaining more popularity though, and I've certainly noticed that many more bicycle lanes have been built recently. What are you studying at the moment? I'm studying English language and literature at the moment over at King's College in London. I started my studies 2.5 years ago. Do you like to spend your free time alone or with other people? Personally, I prefer to spend my free time on my own. For example, last week I was given the night off work and I chose to spend the time unwinding with a book instead of meeting with friends. So all of these answers here use the language from the question to an extent, but do notice they don't just keep repeating that language. They use it to get themselves off to a good start, and they use that good start as a platform to help develop the original idea. Now let's think about that development in this final slide here. The idea of continuing your good start, continuing your answer. Now I've highlighted in green here all the language which is used to develop our original idea. And each of these types of development is slightly different. So we're going to have a look at each form of development, and then I want you to go away, practice some part 1 questions, and use each form of development to help you answer maybe 6 questions yourself. Okay, let's have a look. So the first one. This would be an example of just simply giving a reason. You just add a because. Now this is often prompted by the examiner anyway, when they say why or why not. So we're giving a reason because I'm really curious. The second one, just a bit of extra detail. You're not asked for it, but it just helps to make sure that your language isn't too short, too brief, and you're able to demonstrate your vocabulary and your fluency. The third one uses speculation. So something that you're not sure about, you're giving a reason, but you're not sure of the reason. So you're saying, I've never really thought about why, but I guess. This is nice language to use for speculation. I guess, or I would say, something like that. The fourth one uses a comparison. Now we return to the idea of cars like before, but this time we make it relevant because we're comparing cars to bicycles. That's something that you can do when you're asked about the popularity of things. The fifth one is an element of time detail. So we just give a bit more context by adding a time there. This helps us to kind of mix up the tenses as well, which we'll look at later. And the final one, it just gives an example. This technique is often useful when we're asked about preferences, and again it gives us a good opportunity to just quickly switch between tenses.